Hi, everyone. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. We're giving people a few more minutes to log in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Koali webinar. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. Welcome to the Koali webinar, everyone. We'll be starting in just a minute or so. We're letting people get logged in. Okay, we'll get started. Welcome to the Koali webinar, everyone. I want to thank our guests for joining us. This is a very popular webinar. We have a lot of people who are anxious to hear more about your perspective. So thank you for being here with us. The title of the webinar is Leveraging Research Administration Expertise to Navigate Funding Challenges. And there are certainly many funding challenges right now. We have three wonderful guests. Mindy Pava, who's a partner in Feldman Leifer and a law firm, Kathleen Larmet, who's the executive director of NCURA, and a senior associate vice president of research administration at University of Texas at San Antonio. We're so grateful to have you with us. Oh, Lori, of course, Lori Schultz. There's a paragraph I'm gonna read of each one of our guests before they start. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off by taking just a few minutes and having each of them explain their perspective of what's going on, because they're very diverse and very interesting, different perspectives. So let me give you just a couple of housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded and we'll be sending it out to those who have registered. All attendees are on mute, so you won't be able to talk, but you can ask questions in the QA box. So I'll ask you to ask your questions there in the QA box, and we'll be trying to get to as many as possible, but I suspect that there will be many questions. Okay, so we will start. With just 1 second, sorry. I'm getting my There we go. Sorry about that. We're going to start off with Lori Schultz. So Lori Ann Schultz is the Senior Associate Vice President for Research Administration at the University of Texas at San Antonio, overseeing research operations, policy development, and grant administration. With over 30 years of experience, including leadership at the University of Arizona, she specializes in research intelligence and funding resilience. She also serves on the COGR and ORCID boards of directors, co-chairs the FDP Research Systems and Technology Committee, and has presented in NCURA, SRA, APLU, and EDUCAUSE. Lori, thank you for being here. Do you mind starting off with giving us some insight into what you see right now?
Yeah, what I see, and I honestly, like, in talking with my colleagues and my peers in research administration in the United States, is a lot of us feeling like we're being chased by bears. The news comes out, we feel like we have to run and do something and figure out how we're going to solve it in the moment, because everything's changing. It's changing very fast. There's a lot that's unknown about what's going to happen next. And I think, for all of us, what I'm seeing now is research administrators working to support and help their faculty and their institutions, and having a little bit of trouble understanding how they can do that, what is the most effective way to do that, and maintain their sanity in the meantime.
Thank you, Lori. Kathleen, so Kathleen Larmet. Kathleen Larmet is the executive director of Ancura, leading efforts in advanced research administration globally. She's spearheaded international partnerships, including collaborations with Cuba, IRMA, and Canadian Association of Research Administrators to strengthen research management. A recognized leader in the field, Kathleen organizes global symposia on topics like AI and research funding, driving Ancura's mission to support research administrators worldwide. Kathleen, give us a little bit of your perspective, please.
Hi, Joel. Hi, everyone. Well, as Lori said, there's a lot of being chased by bears, and Cura began looking at ways that we could support our members and research administrators throughout the community beginning in January. And then, of course, our board of directors was together at a meeting. That Friday night surprise hit everybody, and then we began picking up our pace to see what we could do to help not only our members but everybody in the community. And so that's what we've been concentrating on, finding areas to support everyone as we're living through some interesting times.
So everyone here, most everyone here will know what the Friday night surprise is, but could you explain more about what you mean by that specifically?
Sure. That's when we were all at dinner. We were finishing our board dinner, and the first cell phone went off, and there was this look of a huge shock. And it noted the slashing of the indirect cost cap at NIH to 15%. And one by one, cell phones went off, and we all dispersed from the dinner and went off to start working.
I remember when I heard that myself. It's just an absolute crazy moment. Okay, thank you very much. And then last but not least, Mindy Pava. Mindy Pava is a partner at Feldsman Leifer, specializing in federal grants, law, litigation, and government investigations. She advises federal grantees, including research institutions and health centers, on compliance, audits, and disputes. Mindy represents clients in administrative appeals, agency audits, and federal litigation, handling issues such as grant disallowances, regulatory enforcement, and funding disputes. She is currently serving as counsel in a case filed on Monday in DC federal court against HHS, challenging HHS's decision to pause all federal funding to a grantee in the refugee resettlement program.
Hi, everyone, and thanks to Joel and team for having me. So I'm a lawyer that practices in the federal grant space, as Joel said, in normal times, but I'm looking forward to talking in more detail throughout this webinar about how and explaining how we can possibly understand from a legal perspective what's happening now in these much crazier times. And I think as a lawyer, what I'm seeing from a lot of my federal grantee clients is questions about how they can harness the litigation process, the administrative appeal process, the agency appeal process. I feel like they want to use legal terminology for good to help save their grants. And so we're hearing a lot of questions from our clients about, I have this existing grant. I know that when my grant is up and I have to apply for a new grant, that is a competitive process, but I've never seen when I have an existing grant, the government trying to change the terms and conditions of that grant midstream. What do I do? And our answer is there's a process for that. There's an appeal process. There's uniform guidance regulations that need to be followed. And if all else fails, there's the court system. And we'll talk as my presentation goes on later about all of the injunctions that are being issued and what the courts and the legal system is doing to really try and have your back during these trying times. So I think, obviously lawyers in the legal process often get a bad rap where if you talk to me offline, I can tell a lawyer joke just as well as anyone else. But I think we're seeing here, the legal process being used proactively for a lot of good, which is exciting to me as someone who cares about that process.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm curious first if any of you have questions for each other.
I don't. I'd love to hear, I'm very interested in hearing what Kathleen and Lori have to say about what they're seeing from the entities that they serve, and looking forward to hearing what the audience thinks as well.
Lori, I have a question for you. Could you describe more about what kinds of questions you're getting for grants? When somebody contacts you, what kind of agency might be contacting you? What kinds of questions do they have about your awards?
Yeah, so the kinds of things, there are two things happening. On one end there is a lot of communication, on one end there's none. Especially in some of these funding freezes or communication pauses that happened through January and February, we weren't always even able to reach our federal sponsors to find out what was going on, and if we could, they didn't have any information for us. So on the federal agency side, it can be very difficult because those folks are trying to manage a very difficult situation themselves. On the university side, the questions we're seeing is around all the uncertainty, like wanting to know what's going to happen next when we don't know what the answer is. Is so sort of a read into the future on my grant, and is it going to get renewed? Do I have to worry about it? Should I stop work right now? Should I start the process if I've got grant funded personnel of notifying them of what's happening in case we have to let them go through our HR processes? So those are the kinds of questions I'm hearing. I'm going to say honestly, those questions are very preemptive to the situation. And one of the things that, Kathleen referenced the Ancura board, one of our board colleagues said multiple times while we were at our meeting, don't comply in advance. Unless you have a specific termination for a specific award, or a pause, something very specific from your contract or grants official, we are telling people continue the work. If you've got budget, your end date is in the future, there's no reason for you to not continue the work in absence of communication from your sponsor that they are ending things on you. I mean, so a lot of us have received terminations of awards, and all of us have very clear processes for how those things are managed, from the grant side and the financial side all the way through HR processes at our organizations, and we can help our PIs with that. But we're getting a lot of other questions, frankly, that are about how do these things work? One of the things that comes up is everyone's talking now about how NIH study sections aren't happening. And most faculty are aware that if you don't have a study section, then the award doesn't come because they weren't able to talk about it, rank them, and make the award decisions. What they don't know is that things like the Federal Register inform when those study sections meet, and how that process drives knowing when the next meeting is going to happen. So I sort of jokingly say that I have to explain to PIs and deans and associate deans for research a lot more about how the sausage is made than I've ever had to do in the past.
Uh,
Like, okay, when something gets posted in the Federal Register, now there's 30 days. So here's how you sign up for those alerts so you know what's going to happen on your study section. Or one of the greatest jokes in research administration is that your grant does not come with a large novelty check. Like, the money doesn't come when your grants gets here. What you have is budget authority. So explaining to them how we get paid from federal agencies, and how frankly they never had to know how that process works because it is so smooth 99.5% of the time. And so they never had to understand what it meant about how we get budget authority and then get reimbursed for it until now. So some of it is just getting them up to speed on how it works, which gives them a little bit of confidence that we understand what's going on and we know how to manage and mitigate it on the institution side. But there's still a lot of confusion out there, and I will stop there.
I'm interested if Kathleen, what you're hearing from the not customers, but the other universities that you talk to, what are you hearing from them, both about how they're talking to PIs, how they're talking to administration, how are universities dealing with this?
So, Joel, we've been working. We started getting emails and calls from other associations, higher ed associations, and they're all concerned, as we are, about first of all about funding. About every issue every executive order that has come along, there are issues with it. We, of course, support American Council on Education, their suit, along with APLU and AAU, to do, over the 15% cap. And we're also working with Koger. They're looking to file an amicus brief to attach to that lawsuit that ACE APLU and AAU have put forward. So I think we're all moving in the same direction with regard to, the whole idea of the importance of research. And I think we all have to remember to be out there and be proactive and talk about the good stories about research. So many times we see, front page headlines when something has gone wrong. But we need to fill in those stories. In the absence of information, people will put in what they believe to be true. And so we want to make sure that news gets out there. We have a conference in about 2 weeks out in San Diego for about 1,700 research administrators, and we've already alerted the local news to if they can come to the location where some of these stories can be told about important discoveries that are being made at various universities. So that's the way we're supporting each other and standing together to share that information that not everybody has. So we want to make sure that it's out there.
Thank you very much. There's a question from the audience from Mindy. What do you think about RFK Jr.'s announcement that DHHS will bypass the public comment period for internal HHS business? Since he says for internal business, do you think it impacts universities?
Sorry, guys, I was on mute. So I, as a lawyer, obviously hate any type of announcement that says a process is being bypassed, right? Lawyers are creatures of regulatory regimes. We like notice and comment. We like having a certain amount of days. So on high level, obviously very concerning to do away with a procedure like that. I don't know enough about it, honestly, to know how he is extending it to whether it's going to impact HHS or NIH grantees or just the internal business. I just want to be honest, would need to read into that more. But I do think you're seeing in a lot of instances, the government, and I'll include RFK Jr. as a part of the government now, giving these broad statements as to we're going to do this thing, whether it's the funding freeze, whether it's the indirect rate cap, these broad-based announcements, and then they realize they cannot go nearly as far as what they're saying. So whether it's by rescind memos that have rescinded it a few days later, whether it's by the court system, you're seeing a lot of big pronouncements and then the agencies being forced to walk back those statements. Not sure if this will be one of them, but I would take every big pronouncement with hopefully a deep breath and say, let's see how this shakes out in practice as time goes on, and let's see what kind of challenges legally and otherwise result from it.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions. Will slides be shared at the end? I don't know if we're going to share slides. I'm not sure. I think so, and let me know if I'm wrong on that, but we'll be sending out the recording and the slides will be there. There's a viewer who said, the institution I work for have implemented a hiring freeze, discretionary spending, and no salary increases or promotions. So no layoffs mentioned at this point, but there may be more to come. So in the spirit of don't comply in advance, I'm hearing a lot of complying in advance. Do any of you have any thoughts about that?
If you don't mind, I'll speak up a little bit. Yeah, we're definitely hearing that. We're hearing about like travel freezes. So, if folks want to attend conference and other things, they're basically saying they're not allowed to do that for the foreseeable future as institutions uncover what the impact is on their campuses. And I think, the hiring freeze is institutions being conservative about the funding sources. I think that it's in order to figure out what to do next, they're just putting a pause on that. It's challenging. It's challenging for research administration staff. It's challenging for our graduate students and PhD admissions, which I'm seeing happening in other places, because so much of this is reliant on federal funding, both in the form of direct federal funding for students, postdocs, and graduate students, but also indirect recovery for the support staff that facilitate research administration and compliance functions. So we are seeing it. I expect, and if I were to read the future on this, I think it's a normal response. I also think looking into next week and whether or not there's a government shutdown, these things will probably keep happening.
Yeah, Lori, I agree with you completely. And we'll see what happens, a week from tomorrow. whether we have a budget approved or not. But we began to hear a couple of weeks ago, Joel, of some of our members who are losing their positions. And so there's real concern, whether they're university and certainly our federal agency colleagues began talking about this back in December, about how long they would have their positions. So when we started hearing for sure that people were losing jobs at the universities, we opened up a page on our website, which is normally for Incura members. It's called the Incura Career Center. And we opened that up. We made it possible for non-members to access that. And we put that out. I put it out Monday of this week. We had 69 position openings available for people to look at and offered that out. So on Monday, posted in the morning, as of today, there have been 35,000 looks
Ugh.
at that. So let that sink in a little bit. 69 positions, and there have been 35,000 hits. So that's striking to me. And it's all across the board. It's university people that are looking at these, they're sharing, and our federal agency colleagues also.
Mm. So many people, and you're hearing about what roles generally are you hearing about that are at risk or people are being actually let go?
There've been different levels, and depending on the institution and where they get the majority of their funding. And we've seen one person, their institution is 80% funded by NIH. So there's some things happening there, but it seems to be across the area.
Okay.
And I think people are, you're talking about a freeze and a pause. I think some institutions may be a little proactive in making moves.
Thank you. There's a comment here. I just wanted to mention that hospitals are also included in the focus of this webinar, along with universities. My question is, how are other institutions, things are changing here, how other institutions are managing the potential risk of advanced spending on NIH awards and subawards while waiting for the next year's funding to arrive? As we all know, it's common for spending to extend into the next year funding, particularly with subawards with longer negotiation timeframes. This can create a financial risk if the expected NIH funding doesn't come through as planned.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and start. And I think this question, when we're talking about grantees, I mean, I come from a university context for the most part, but I really want to include my academic medical centers and other grantees because we're all doing very similar work that has the equal value. And there was another question about similar principles responding in West Virginia. And my response to both of these is going to start from the same place, which is doing an inventory of what you have so you understand the impact. For understanding what awards for NIH in particular, what awards do you have right now that are about to be at their end date or already are at the end date if their end date for the current year was on February 28th, for instance, and have you received the mod for the non-competing continuation or have you not? Like having a list of that information to understand what's happening and understand like how far out you need to plan for the continuation funding that's coming in the next 6 to 12 months. That's really critical. The same thing is true for work that might be restricted based on this targeted language and words, understanding how to find that work in the grants and awards that you have at your organization. So you know what you can make a preliminary risk assessment and understand like what is sort of a high risk of being an issue or not a high risk of being an issue. I will go to some examples I've seen from NASA this week where there are DEI components written into the grant, but what our program officer told us was, we're not cutting your budget, we're just taking this part out of your scope of work. And so a lot of it is situational, it's case by case, but there's information coming out all the time on what we think the agency approaches are going to be. But the critical path is understanding what you have on your campus today so that you can make a call about what the risks are. When it comes to things like advanced spending or continuation spending as we wait month to month from an NIH award to its continuation, a lot of schools are looking at whether or not we backstop. and having conversations with their colleges to say, this is what the risk is. And none of us has a magic pot of money to help figure out what's going to happen. Some institutions are starting to roll out bridge funding, but it's not going to be able to cover 100% of everyone's problems because none of us has money like that. So, but again, like figuring out where you are is important because that list will help you understand what to do next.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about this on this webinar. We're doing a webinar next week, but we've come up with a free tool that somebody can use if they want to, called Grant Risk. So grantrisk.koali.co. So anyone with an EDU email can sign up for it. And there are a couple things you can do. And I'm going to ask y'all how you might use this. The things that you can do are, number one, you can upload your award, just your awards, the descriptions and the titles of the awards, and it will use AI to tell you how potentially at risk they are. To your point, Lori, about starting to analyze your project, your awards. Two, you can put your award information in to see whether it's on the list of flagged awards from the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. They've flagged, I think, 2,000 specific awards or something. You can see if you're on that list and what the risk is based on the words that have been designated as at-risk awards. And then three, you can search the SAM.gov, the data from the SAM.gov database, the federal programs. You can search those to see which ones of those are potentially at risk based on the words that are associated with those awards. How, pardon me, how might you use that to be able to assess the risk for your current awards and for those programs? Anyone have thoughts on that?
I'll pipe in and say I think it's a great idea, and having that available is really important. It's I think getting that information from grant risk and comparing it with your institutional data is critically important, because you will also find that some of those things are context specific, and everything on that list is not gonna be a red flag. You're gonna find lots of green flags. When I was going through that list before grant risk existed, I would find it funny if it weren't ludicrous, but a grant highlighting plant diversity was picked out as a risk, and it's like, well, that's just using the word, not the actual context of what the work was that was being performed on this particular grant. But I think that these kinds of tools and having an understanding of the data in your own system is going to help you refine that level of risk and have conversations with your PIs, their department chairs in colleges, when you think there might be problems that they need to work on.
Thank you. All right, so we put the link in, and we'll be doing a webinar about this next week with Steve Dowdy from University of Maryland, and talking about how you could actually use the tool. But it's grantrisk.koali.co. We've got a question for Mindy. The reasons given on grant termination do not match the NOA stated reasons for termination. So I'm curious what others are doing. One, are you getting legal involved and pushing back? And two, how are you handling expenses? Are you requesting invoices from contracted consultants and contractors through the end of the current project period, or trying to prorate expenses? What about grad students and their tuition and expense?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the first part of that, and maybe Lori can jump in as to what she's seeing with the second part as far as what's going on like within a university. So I'm working on behalf of several clients right now who have that exact same situation. I know there's probably a lot of HHS grantees on here, but we're dealing with some clients in the university of context who also have Department of Education grants that were terminated, and the stated reasons for termination and the termination letter said, something about your grant was against the administration's new priorities, that language that we all know is relating to DEI, even though we really don't think these grants are focused on DEI at all in our opinion. And so, we are involved, and we're going through the administrative appeal process that's outlined in the termination letter. And one of the things that we're strongly pushing back on, because it's a Department of Education grant, you're under Part 200 in the uniform guidance, not to get all legal wonky here, but you have to know whether you're under Part 75 as an HHS grantee or under Part 200 in the uniform guidance relating to other agencies. And their termination provision in Part 200.340A4 says that a federal award can only be terminated pursuant to the terms and conditions of the federal award. So there needs to be a term and condition in your grant saying expressly that the grant award can only be terminated if it no longer effectuates the program goals or agency priorities. That needs to be in the terms and conditions of your grant. If it's not, and then if the agency comes back and says, we're terminating your grant because of this, you have a really good legal case, a really good argument to say, pursuant to the uniform guidance on termination, no, you can't do that. Now we'll see how the agency responds, but we've been writing letters saying like these terminations are unlawful based on everything we've signed and according to the terms and conditions of our grant. So, you know, if the agency, when we submit those letters, we'll see how it goes with the agency. Eventually, if we exhaust all of our remedies in front of the agency, we can take that up to a court.
Mindy, if somebody is trying to figure out how they would get involved in legal action, do they just talk to the counsel for the university? Do they call you directly? Do they put you in, what would you suggest there?
Sure. Most major universities have a counsel office that you would go to first. You know, usually it's not a professor, an individual professor that hires us in our firm. It goes through the counsel's office. Certainly if you want to say that, you know, lawyers that specialize in grants work, we'd be glad to have your referral, obviously. But yes, usually we have relationships with certain university counsel, and the university counsel would then go to us. So the two entities that I'm working on right now with the Department of Education appeal, we're working in conjunction with their associate general counsel. So it's the professor that has the grant or the researcher that has the grant, the university general counsel, and then myself and my firm.
Thank you. Okay, here's another question. What are others hearing about the EA issued in February 28th requiring agencies to provide a justification for every grant and contract payment that's in the proposed new DOGE system prior to authorizing the payment? Does this apply to PMS? And then there's a link. Y'all can see the link there in the chat. Does anyone want to cover that one?
We looked into that on behalf of a few clients that had questions. In our view, it was written in a way that was almost like a technical tech support EO saying, you know, create this system, create this technical system. We are saying right now to our clients that there's probably other EOs that are more important and more pressing of your time. We'll see how this one is rolled out down the road, but our view is that, first of all, agencies are already insuring on PMS. You know, if you look at the PMS additional detail tab on the PMS drawdowns, when you make a drawdown request, there's 3 tabs as I understand it, and one is called additional details. If you click on that tab, you'll see that each line of your drawdown has to be reviewed by an agency official already. So I think a lot of that is being done in order to allow the funding to move forward via PMS. And this EO is basically asking DOGE to implement a much more robust and technical system for making it happen.
Thank you. Any thoughts from anyone else on that before I move on? We have a ton of questions. Okay. I'm interested in examples. So we've heard some ad hoc we've heard some examples of people. There's a specific one. I have go ahead. I have an NIFA award that got paused from working because the word diversity was in the description of the award. As it happens, the award has nothing to do with DEI. Has anyone else seen this? I've heard a lot about this. I'm interested in your experiences of people that are experiencing this kind of thing.
Yeah, I've seen this, and in the cases I've seen after conversations with the program office, we're able to get it unpaused. I think if that doesn't work, reaching out to your institution's legal counsel is critical so that you can develop a strategy with them to explain what's actually happening, because there are a lot of false positives in this space, and we
Exactly.
need to be looking out for them. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we created Grant Risk. So Steve contacted us from University of Maryland, and he was doing this on his own. He was downloading all of the program names because he wanted to see which program names were at risk. And he was like literally searching for DEI related words or vaccine or whatever kind of related words. And that's why we created Grant Risk, so that you could go in, it would find that list of words that were in the Washington Post article, and it would just give you a score of all of the federal programs, but also your awards if you upload them, and tell you whether they're at risk because of the words. And many of them are going to be false positives, but it will give you some insight into what people of the government might be thinking themselves when they find those words in your description. So it just gives you a heads up that there might be someone coming knocking on the door.
I just want to say from a legal perspective, that should not be happening anymore because there is an injunction in place. The district court for the District of Maryland, there was a case filed a few weeks ago, and I believe it was last week or maybe 10 days ago or so, the court issued a preliminary injunction that prohibits any agency of the United States from terminating awards or pausing fundings on the basis of the DEI executive orders. Now, still might be some agencies doing that, but there is a court order saying whether the right diversity word or not comes up shouldn't matter. There shouldn't be this analysis happening right now where agencies are terminating certain grants or pausing funding based on any DEI words according to this court's order. So we hope and when that court issued the order, it told the government counsel to inform all of the agencies that this was going on and that the court's order should govern. So we think this injunction should be really important, of significant importance and you should be pointing to it to try and push back. So yes, you can certainly work with your program sponsor and work with the agency and say, no, this was a false positive. We aren't doing any DEI. But another thing to say is that DEI as a whole, at least according to this injunction in place right now, should not be the basis for terminating a grant, according to a court order issued about 10 days ago.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That's really helpful to know. I appreciate you sharing that. There's a question about the Department of Education. What happens to education grants? I know we probably don't know the answer to this, but interested in your insight. What happens to education grants if the Department of Education is disbanded?
You know, I will ask Mindy to weigh in on some of the legal aspects here, but my feeling on this is that they can't disband the entity without an act of Congress, is my understanding of the situation. So there is a lot of talk, and I'm not saying programs won't be cut and they won't try to do a lot of things that have serious impact to our institutions, but I also think that there needs to be a settling of the reality on what can actually happen here.
Yeah, my view is that is uncharted waters. If you have an existing grant with the US government and it's for a 3-year project, what happens to that money if the entire entity that you've contracted with goes away? Well, Department of Education might go away, but the US government as a whole is still there. So I think, there's certainly a strong argument to be made that the disbanding of the Department of Education is not it should not change your grant because you've contracted with the government as a whole. Now, what that means for new grants, and if you have a renewal cycle, if you have a grant that's ending and you're supposed to be having like a notice of funding coming up, that is more unclear. But I do think you have a strong legal basis for keeping an existing grant because your contracting partner is an agency of the US government. And as long as the US government is still there, which, we'll see. But yes, as long as the US government is still there, I think you have a good chance of legally of saying you can't terminate this grant midstream.
Mindy, somebody asked the name of the injunction again.
Yeah, I am looking up the case right now. It was in the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, and it's a preliminary injunction. I have the case right in front of me. I'll put it in the chat, the webinar chat. I'm looking it up right now. Give me 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions about grant risk. There are several that are asking if we'll make it available to .org extensions. Yes, we will.
And I see a question about what the majority is required. So it's a 60, it's a super majority. It would be required for a Department of Education. On the Senate side, that is, yeah.
Okay. Is there a similar tool for screening funding opportunities that may not be funded in the future?
That's a
Kayla,
really
I've not heard of that.
me either.
Use grant risk in order to find out programs which might be subject to scrutiny. So you could find out programs, which obviously the awards and the grants kind of accrue to those programs. But I don't know one. The only way to do it is to take those potential grants and run them through the system to see if it gets a risk score in the system. Thanks for the question there. Oh, there's so many questions.
You know, someone asks a question about the article in Nature that was today about the NIH staff needing to group grants into sort of risk categories. And I think, you know, part of this is why this time is so hard. We get this information from a news source about an internal memo from an agency, but we don't have information about what they're actually going to do. So what we need to do, in my opinion, is like I'm going to give my advice for maintaining your sanity. My advice is take a breath. Don't comply in advance. Figure out how you're going to assess the impact before you have to do anything. And that comes back to understanding your data, understanding the awards you have that may fall into one of those categories that are in the Nature article. And I will send that to, if those don't have it, I will send it to Anne to put in the chat. Because right now it is internal communications that don't have any impact on us in the form of an actual grant termination or stop work order. That's not, I don't want to be overly optimistic and say no bad things are going to happen. But I also think part of it is we need to have a measured response to understand what the impact might be. But until and unless we have direction from our granting entity, there's not much more to do than that.
I very much agree with that. I wanted to speak to this point earlier when Lori and Kathleen were talking, but we're telling our clients that it is a risk tolerance for them, how much they want to self-censor. We're calling it self-censoring. Lori was bringing up other terminology that's also appropriate, but you know, if you feel like you need to change some of your policies and procedures and things to get ahead of this, look, clearly, you know, I just spoke about the DEI preliminary injunction in the Maryland court. A court has blocked grant terminations for DEI for now, but we do know, let's be honest, we do know that it is a priority of this administration to cut down on DEI related programming, and you're going to see it in many states as well. So it's a risk tolerance for you. Right now, for example, with the court injunction in place, I don't think you have to change any of your programmatic offerings, but you might want to proactively do a large review of what's out there, which ones of your grants, what programs you have might run afoul of these DEI terms, because we know that it's going to come back around in some different and unexpected way down the road. So I think there's a difference right now with Trump giving some executive order. Everyone's saying, how do I react to this? An executive order is not law. So the answer is you write when he says an executive order. You don't have to rush off to the races and do anything. We call that self-censoring, but it is prudent to look at your policies, look at your procedures, look at your grants, and make some determinations long-term about how, if it is implemented in a way that is close to what we are expecting, what that would mean for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, the risk tolerance is exactly the right way to phrase that. At our board meeting, we talked about risk tolerance because we have a very robust DEI program at Incura, and you know, one of our core values is inclusiveness. And as one body together, we decided we were not going to change our values. We are looking at what possible ramifications there could be. We have 2 contracts that were put on hold And one of them had to sign off on, we had to confirm that we had no DEI programming. And that was something we could not certify because it's very easy to go to our website and see all of our programs. So it's, you know, individual, every institution will determine what that tolerance is.
So so there's a question about what an executive order is. If an executive order doesn't have any power, is it just a recommendation? What power does it have? This is from one of our participants.
Yeah, it's some very powerful person, the president, shouting atop a hill saying, I want to do something. President has a lot of power, but it is not a law. It is not a regulation. I mean, one of the executive orders Trump said was that the Gulf of Mexico should be renamed as the Gulf of America. But if that's not implemented anywhere, it's one person again standing atop a hill saying, this is my priority. Now, it's a very powerful person. So take that with a grain of salt. But just when the executive order is announced on a random Tuesday night, it is not law as of Wednesday morning. It is a priority policy position expressed by a very powerful person. And oftentimes he then says, agencies, I'm giving you 30 days or 60 days to implement this policy. It is only, you know, relevant, extremely relevant to you once your funding agency implements it. And each agency can implement different things different ways. Department of Energy might implement something very differently than HHS. So an executive order is a good indication of the policy priorities of the executive, and it's a good indication of something coming down the pike that you should be aware of, but it is not law, and it is not something that you have to cancel all your meetings the next day and address immediately.
We have several people that are logged in from other countries. And one of the questions here is, I work at a university in the UK, and I was wondering if any specific references have been made about foreign grant holders and subawardees, particularly for NIH awards.
I don't have specific information about NIH, but I want to be transparent in saying yes, they are looking at payments of U.S. federal funds to other nations. What that looks like and what that means, I don't know yet.
There's a question, I don't understand the question, but hopefully one of y'all will. Is the weird award revisions pausing work and funding a way to get around doing award terminations? Does anyone understand that question?
Yeah, I'll start and say I know I've seen examples of these modifications and weird pausing language that was clearly written quickly, without a lot of analysis. I would say I don't think it's the agency trying to get around something. I think it's the agency trying to respond quickly to way their leadership has decided to implement the EO, and so they're working fast, they're working hard, and they're trying to get this done in response to directions from their management, and it's just it doesn't all look good. For me personally, I don't suspect anything nefarious there.
How are other institutions handling the requests from OMB to respond to the survey on awards that work in foreign aid programs? These have been coming from USDA Foreign Ag Service.
I've seen a few of those examples, and I will stop talking if others have something to say. What I'm seeing two things. One is the turnaround time being requested is quite short. Some institutions have been lucky in working with them to get it extended by a couple of days. But what I am seeing is that the institutions I know that have received them are responding. Also, again, involve your legal counsel. Make sure they're aware this is happening. That's one part of the equation. And then if you can get an extension, get one.
Kathleen, Mindy, anything you want to add to that?
Not on that point. I'm answering a lot of questions. Sorry to take your job, Joel.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I'm answering a lot of the Q&As right now that people are posting about preliminary injunctions. And I just want to be clear that there are 41 cases that 41 legal challenges that have resulted in some sort of pause, either a TRO or a preliminary injunction. I've talked previously on this webinar about the preliminary injunction implemented by the District of Maryland that's blocking many of the provisions in the DEI executive orders, but there's also preliminary injunctions in a Rhode Island court and a DC court that are blocking the attempted funding freeze, the OMB memo that implemented on that crazy day in January, very chaotic day, the across the board funding freeze, and then later there was a memo rescinding it. That funding freeze has also been blocked in separate courts by the preliminary injunction. So I'm just getting a few questions that seem to be like confusing with good reason. There's 41 cases and it's very confusing to know what all this means. So I'm going to try to answer as best I can on the written answers, but I just have one question here that says, is it true that the preliminary injunction only applies to the states that are plaintiffs? The answer to that is yes, in the Rhode Island funding freeze case, it does, not in the DDC funding freeze case, and not in the District of Maryland DEI preliminary injunction. So it's, keeping everything in a row. This is very chaotic, moving very quickly. Understandably, those with not a legal background having trouble following it all, but I just want to, be clear that we're talking about multiple court actions and legal filings to help protect the rights of grantees.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left. We have many questions. We'll just keep going through, but if you have questions, definitely put them in the chat. We've heard about diversity supplements being at risk in NIH shared in Nature today. What about grants that institutions could only apply to as a minority serving investigator? Will those be targeted?
I think that's a very good question. The answer at this point is unknown. I work for a Hispanic serving institution. We're curious about what the impact is on institutions labeled as MSIs, HSIs, and we just don't know the answer yet. Yeah.
Is it possible to get access to the resources in this Q&A afterwards? We will do a summary of some of the key things that have the conversations that have happened in the QA and in the chat, and we will share that with you. Mindy, is there a clearinghouse where we can see all the cases and the current status? It's a great question.
That is such a great question, and it's moving so quickly that I can't say that it's being updated in real time. I do know the Washington Post and New York Times are tracking all the new filings. Again, it might be a day or two lag time. My firm is we've also tracked some of them that are of importance to our clients, but I think, doing a search on the New York Times website might be the best way to get a sense of that. And of course, there's some that have nothing to do with, there's all kinds of cases that have been filed. My firm also represents a lot of federally qualified health centers in addition to research institutions. And for our health center clients, they care so much about all the anti-immigration orders. And so all the cases that have been filed relating to that, gender affirming care. So there's a ton of cases against the administration's new priorities. We're focusing today, obviously, on the funding freeze cases, the DEI cases, the ones that are most relevant to this audience. But I read again that there were 41 cases that have been some sort of paused some sort of effort on multiple different areas that the administration has tried to put forward.
There's a question about the Fulbright program and other programs like it. Has anyone heard if the full Fulbright program is at risk? I know the teaching assistant program for foreign language has been paused.
I have not heard anything specific about Fulbright.
Okay. With all the TROs and preliminary injunctions are in place, however, many agencies, including NIH, have not been issuing new awards, and IFA's funding opportunities are pending, and work pause orders and orders requiring to remove DEI scope are coming in weekly. There is clearly a disconnect between legal actions and real actions by agencies. What strategies do you recommend?
Another great question, and really something that is concerning to everyone in the legal field, because we're used to the courts being one of the three branches of government and having that type of power. And usually if a federal district court issues an injunction, the other branches of government immediately follow. And so we've, there's been posts on Twitter by certain high-level ranking members of this administration going after federal court judges and saying, how can one judge in Rhode Island or one judge in Maryland issue an injunction that would stop the administration's priorities full scale across the country? And, as someone who's practiced in litigation for 15 years, and others in my firm for longer than I have, haven't seen that type of attack on federal judicial authority. So this is, I hate to, put a cloud over this webinar towards the end, but this is scary times if the executive branch and the executive branch agencies are not going to follow a court order. The court has the ability to haul those people into court, to take sanctions against the executive branch, to eventually hold people in contempt of court. But those are scary things to think about, a court hauling in the head of the NIH or head of HHS and having them account for why their agency is not following a court order. How it usually works in the legal field is that there's a court order and the agencies should be following that court order. So if an agency is saying to you right now, you need to rid your programmatic offerings of anything relating to DEI, our suggestion is to fire back with a letter from your counsel saying it is our understanding that right now a preliminary injunction is in place, blocking that and attaching the court order and doing what you can to show the agency that they need to be under the purview of that court order. But I can't speculate as to what will happen if the agency says, no, sorry, I'm not following the court order. That's really uncharted waters for most of us in the legal profession.
Thanks, Mindy. We just had a very interesting question that I'd like each one of you to think about, if you don't mind. Does anyone have a great elevator speech to try to explain to people outside of this field why these actions do affect and impact all Americans, not just those of us who work with federal grants and contracts, and to encourage everyone to reach out to their representatives to express their outrage and concern? I've been seeing and hearing too many comments in response to articles that clearly show that a huge percentage of Americans do not understand the impact. How do you talk to this, to colleagues, to family, to friends, to help them understand what is the impact?
Well, I don't mind starting. That is a really great question, Vicki, because it is so difficult. It is hard to get folks to understand, and sometimes you have to do a little bit of navigating their empathy around the things that incredible federally funded research in the United States has done for us. The fact that we are sitting here talking in this virtual space is one of those things. Your ability to be connected with your family and friends via phones and Wi-Fi and other things, it comes from that. Like some of the most transformative things that we use day to day and take for granted have come out of US federal agencies, including things like clinical trials that are helping our family members get through very difficult health crises, and very simple things, including vaccinations and other health treatments that are keeping us healthier than we used to be and protecting us from disease. There are so many ways, and I know those are controversial for some folks, but there are so many ways to think about, as a person in the United States, so much about the safety of our food, the safety of our roads, the safety of our day-to-day flying, and even in today's environment, flying is safer than driving, comes from the results of federal research and federal funding. And since I know the person who asked the question, I would also explain to them why your job is as a result of that federal funding. Because in this world where folks seem to be lacking empathy for the plights of others, maybe the personal stories help the most.
Thank you. Kathleen, Mindy, anything you want to add to that? An elevator?
Well, it's a perfect story, Lori. It's perfect. And again, and then we would add on to the whole idea of a competitive edge. So it's everything with research from medical to climate control to the latest gadget that's out there that keeps America competitive. So if we're looking at more than one reason, the economic reason is also there. That is maybe a selling point to certain individuals. But certainly anyone who has a relative who has been saved through medical advances, to tell the story where that research was done. It didn't pop up. And I agree, Lori, being empathetic, and having a calm conversation with other individuals about the importance of what's being done. We've been doing this since the 1940s. The United States has been investing in its research, and so it's in a very important spot for the country.
I think I would just hire Lori to give my elevator speech because she did such a good job. But no, I think, for me as someone who represents research institutions, and everything Lori and Kathleen said is so important about scientific research and other types of research that is just affects every facet of our day-to-day lives, some of which we probably don't even realize. But for me, I represent all types of federal grantees, obviously research institutions, medical centers, hospitals, but also agencies, Head Start agencies, health centers. And I think for me, with the funding freeze, the OMB memo, I was trying to share with my friends and family that this is, if they pause federal funding to everyone, it's not just, the elites in an ivory tower, which maybe in some instances you think, okay, why do those researchers at Harvard need that much money? But it's the federal funding and federal grants flow down to every facet of American life, going to a national park on a vacation, having kids be able to attend free and reduced preschool through a Head Start program. I mean, it's just weather, look at all the natural disasters, the flooding in North Carolina, or hurricanes, or, big, snow blizzards in the northern states. Like, any facet of life is funded by federal grants, including all the work that research institutions do. And so I think most people just don't realize that if you have 24 hours in a day, so much of your day is touched by what the federal government money flows down to. And I think it's really important not just to look at it as something that, an academic is doing in a research lab, but something that really infiltrates the entire country.
Thank you,
And
y'all.
those
I
of you
really
who are out
appreciate.
there in the front line who are managing those programs,
Yeah.
you are so important. It's exhausting. Lori started out by being chased by bears. It's day in and day out, and this is going to be a marathon. It's going to be a long haul. So I would, know how important you are, how important you are to your institution, your hospital, research institute, because what you do is critical. And just know that you are definitely needed, and to hang in there.
Please
Thank
take
you
care of
so much.
yourself.
I really sorry, Lori.
Sorry, no, I was just saying, please take care of yourselves because you're important. So,
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that. I'm just grateful for our colleagues, for those of you who showed up here, and for those of you who aren't, who are out on the front lines. We're just grateful for you, and know that you're going through a lot, and our hearts are with you. If you would like to attend the webinar next week, you'll be able to register for it. If you want to learn more about grant risk, you can just go log in. It's free. We're not charging anyone anything for it. Hopefully it's useful to you. And we'll be talking more next week about how you actually use it. Thank you very much, y'all. I hope y'all have a great rest of your day.
thanks, Joel. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, everyone, for your time
Thank
today.
you.